Good afternoon, everyone. This is Friday, February 5th, and this is Senate Education. This afternoon, we are going to start by spending some time with a bill that Senator Rahm and others submitted. And I apologize, I just misplaced my agenda. But I believe the bill number, Jim, do you have the bill number there?
27.
Thank you very much. S27. Jim took us through this bill, I think it was last week when Senator Rahm came in. She suggested as we get going on it, she's put forward a couple of witnesses, a couple of ideas. So we reached out to those individuals and we'll be hearing from them today. In addition to our work on literacy and school discipline, I do see us starting to put together some kind of miscellaneous education bill. And I'll look to the committee for the kinds of things that they would like in there. But this is certainly one idea. I was thinking about putting this in with the libraries bill, as well as the bill that Senator Lyons co-sponsored with Senator Hardy on just broadly women's health in public schools. So those are three things that I'm thinking about putting into a miscellaneous bill, but of course I'll look to all of you as we move forward. So why don't we get started? I'm not sure which of our two witnesses would like to begin. You're both on my agenda, so I don't know if the two of you discussed who would go first. Jesse?
Hello. We did not discuss this, but I am happy to kick things off if that's amenable to the committee.
That would be terrific.
Great.
Thanks for being with us. If you'll just introduce yourself for the record, tell us a little bit about yourself, and give us your thoughts on S27.
Great. Well, thank you, Senator Campion, and to the full committee for having me. Also, I need to say that Jeannie, I think maybe that's how you pronounce her name, is lovely to work with and coordinate with. So you have a really wonderful staff liaison. My name is Jessie Baker. I am the city manager in Winooski. I have served in this role for 4 years and am speaking today on behalf of myself as well as Mayor Lott, who unfortunately had a professional conflict today in her regular job. So thank you for having me. And I do have, I'm sorry I was not able to send it to you in advance, but I do have a few comments to make first, and then I'm happy to answer any questions if that's amenable.
That's fine. And just a reminder for committee members, now that I do have my agenda in front of me, this is facilitating cultural liaisons in schools and in municipalities and looking at that possible partnership.
Yes. So again, thank you for being invited to provide testimony today. S27 as introduced would support Winooski's community-wide efforts to provide educational and municipal services in culturally appropriate ways. It would allow us to expand the ways in which we provide services to all community members and make sure all of our community members had access to the services provided, as well as a voice at all decision-making tables, and hopefully a seat at those tables as well. Of course, I am biased, but Winooski, I think, is a very special place. As you likely know, we are the only majority and minority school district in the state. We are also a single municipality school district, which is not unique, but is an advantage to us. 18% of our residents were born in another country, which we use as a placeholder for limited English proficiency or English is not a first language. Our community has been a welcoming community for decades, open to new neighbors, and we really see our diversity as among our biggest strategic advantages. Under this legislation, if passed, our ability to partner with our school district and jointly fund our community liaison roles would be a huge benefit. This idea first emerged in our community in 2018 at an equity summit we held with formal and informal leaders from across the city, the school, and other community partners. Expanding those roles and having dollars beyond just educational fund dollars to support this work would allow us to maximize the resources we have to best serve our community It would allow us to provide those services in the most efficient way possible. So through, the individual community liaisons rather than multiple roles and multiple partners. It would create livable wage jobs for the individuals doing this work now within the school district. And it would allow us to expand those jobs to full-time, year-round jobs, which of course these roles in our communities are so critical and really don't follow just the school calendar. I also, just in wrapping up, I also wanted to note that while this has been a priority of ours for several years, it has become more and more apparent through COVID-19. When you think about whose role is it to get out accurate information about COVID precautions, or to inform neighbors about vaccination opportunities, or to communicate the importance of isolation and quarantine if tested positive, it's really all of our roles. It's the state government, obviously, it's municipalities, it's school districts. A similar thing can be said about things like affordable housing access, unemployment, childcare, and public safety support. Clearly, all of those factors impact how children show up to school and need to be communicated to all of our residents. However, they are also clearly critical to the healthy functioning of a municipality and a community. So we would like the opportunity to help fund that and help coordinate those efforts so they go beyond just the walls of the school and can reach out to the community as a whole. Being able to share those resources and contribute to funding those resources only makes sense and will only strengthen our community. So those are what I wanted to share, and I'm happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
So I'm just wondering, just to kick it off, so right now what is happening and Jesse, you're with the schools, or you're with the town?
City manager.
The city manager.
I'm the city manager, so I'm the municipal equivalent to the school superintendent.
Okay, so what's happening right now without this in place? What sorts of things, how are things getting done?
So it's a great question. So right now, our community liaisons in our school district help communicate between the educational needs of our children and their families. And often, to be honest, that spills over into city messaging as well. However, when we as the city want to get word out to all of our community about a new service offered or a policy we're considering and invite those voices to the table, we are either funding those professionals in hours above what they are already working, or we're hiring different professionals and different translators who don't have the relationships with the families, or honestly, we're just not doing it and we're not effectively reaching our neighbors. So this would allow us to, again, identify those full-time staff, have them build relationships in the community, and then send messages both on the education front and on the municipal front.
Helpful. Questions? Other questions? Senator Hooker.
Thank you, Jesse. I can see the need for this, certainly in the schools and within the community. So, and you've mentioned that during the pandemic, the need for it has been magnified. Can you give some examples of where you've entered into some kind of a liaison with certain communities either during the pandemic or at times where you as the community, as a city, have paid for these services?
Sure. Let me tell you about two different examples, if I may. One, so as you likely know, Winooski had the first community spread outbreak of COVID over the summer. And as part of that outbreak, and then again, more recently in the winter, we stood up morning huddles with VDH to make sure, for the Vermont Department of Health, to make sure first thing in the morning, we were all on the same page about testing, access to transportation, access to food support services so folks could maintain quarantine. During the school was a part of that partnership and sat at that table because obviously they are significant community leaders as well. And through that effort, the community liaisons were able to work with families that they knew to be in isolation and quarantine and ensure that they had the best access to services. At that point, we felt like that was an appropriate use of school funds to do that because, again, it was that ability for children to stay engaged in school and stay participating in that virtual learning environment. Having said that, it is a question about whether that is a municipal expense or a school expense. Second example I'd like to offer is that we are, as part of these conversations at the city level to improve how we are inclusive in our community, we were recently successful at receiving a Working Communities Challenge grant through the Boston Fed. And as part of that process, we wanted to identify ways we as the city could be more equitable in how we provide services. Through that process, we actually contracted, we the city, entered into individual contracts with the community liaisons, happened to be the community liaisons because they are the ones that had the relationship in the community, and had them partner with us to do some of that initial planning work and bring their expertise to the fore. But what that resulted in was those individuals having full-time jobs where they were providing services at the education level, and then additionally doing this work for the city. And if we had the opportunity to partner on that work, then together we could build reasonable work plans that were supported by a living wage and equitable hours and whatnot, rather than, going back to the same people time after time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions? Senator Hooker, I'm wondering, so in the city of Rutland, I'm sorry, Senator Lyons, please.
Thank you. It's good to see you here today, Jesse. And thanks for all the great work that you're doing. It's really evident. I don't think people fully understand the integrated network between school and city. It is really amazing. When you look at the newsletter that the school puts out, it's really a community newsletter. And so I have a difficult time when I'm reading it, pulling things apart, whether or not it's the city of Winooski or the school district, and it's a good thing. So one thing I will ask you is, have you talked with the Department of Health at all about any resources that are coming as a result of the federal funding passed in December? And the availability, there's going to be huge availability for the Department of Health to do translations, information, and working with minority populations. And I'm just wondering if it seems to me that this would be a perfect opportunity for your community liaison to work with those folks and put some things together. But that's probably a step ahead of where you are right now. But
thank you, Senator Lyons, and nice to see you as well. So we have worked with the Vermont Department of Health. We still have these Monday, Wednesday, and Friday huddles with them to ensure that our community, both Burlington and Winooski, are being equitably served by the services coming out of VDH. And I will say they have been amazing partners. Also at that table are the Association of Africans Living in Vermont, USCRI, Committee on Refugees and Immigrants, and UVMMC. So yes, VDH has absolutely, and our community liaisons are on those calls as well to ensure that they're getting the same messaging and able to push out through their networks the same information. VDH has been an incredible support in ensuring that our community's needs are met, and certainly we will continue to work with them on any new funding they get, really to ensure, honestly, that funding is done by the communities, not just to the communities, but the members of my community who are, for whom English is a second language, are using their cultural expertise to be those public health promoters, not just people who look like me going to them with messaging. Thank you.
Senator Hooker and Senator Terenzini, I'm wondering, is there a need for this in Rutland, given, first of all, this can be used anywhere. I'm wondering what the rest of the state looks like in terms of needs.
Well, I'll try to address some of that. As you know, 4 years ago, we had an opportunity to have 25 refugee families settle in Rutland. We ended up with 3 families. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that the opportunity is reopened. So many things have happened since then, where the borders were closed, both at the city and in the country. And I'm hoping that that's going to be there's going to be a change there. But I have to say that this type of liaison would have been wonderful for the families that moved here. We did have help from the refugee resettlement for a while, but their funding was limited. And so the families were essentially on their own. And I have to give credit to the very devoted group of volunteers who stepped in, including one family that became surrogate grandparents and have made sure that the kids have gotten to school, that they get to their doctor's appointments, that the parents have been able to engage in English language classes. One of the families they've all moved into different houses, which is good. They started out in small apartments that one of our local landlords provided at a very, very reasonable rate, and then moved to more suitable apartments, and then finally 2 houses. 2 of them have their own. But I think that this type of liaison would have been invaluable for them. Great. Certainly not many of us in Rutland spoke Syrian or Turkish or whatever they were speaking when they came. Thankfully, we did have a few people who had been here for a while, for quite some time, who were from Syria, and they were able to step in as well. But I have to give a lot of credit to people who have been tutors and friends and helpers and movers over the past 4 years.
Senator Tiranzini, anything to add there?
Well, I had put my hand up before you posed the question to me, Senator Campion, but if you don't mind, I'll ask now. I read the bill. I have it here in my hand, and to me, it's almost surprising that this has to come before the legislature. I've served on school board and select board and so on. And to me, it's almost like, if you identify a need in your school district or community, you go out and take care of that need. I mean, if you look at a school, if you need to hire another custodian or another bus driver or add a school nurse, to me, it's you do what you have to do to run the school or the business. And to me, if a community needed this position, which obviously not all Vermont communities or school districts would need a liaison, but obviously some do. It just, to me, I guess it's a little bit baffling that it's even here in our committee as to why, the law or the school district just doesn't hire what they need to operate the business.
Good question. Jim,
I don't know. That wasn't a question. I guess it was just a statement.
Yeah, right. But I think it's an important one, and I think it's a good reminder for all of us just to pause and ask Jim. Jim, this is, tell us again, what is this? This is allowing to happen.
So the statute that it's amending requires separation of municipal funding from education funding. Okay, so it's unclear to me when you have a jointly funded position from municipal money and education money, how that fits into the separation that we have in statute. So this is saying that notwithstanding that separation in statute, school districts can do this. They can jointly fund this position. The same would be true for SROs. We have a statute on SROs now, but it's not really an enabling language. So really SROs should fall into the same category of having an exception to this division, because that's certainly funded too. And that's not done so far in statute. I think it should be done, but this is making it clear that notwithstanding separation, this position can be jointly funded by school districts and municipalities.
So right now, SROs, school resource officers, are a combination of funds, municipal funds and school funds generally?
Yes, but there's no permissive language in statute like we're doing here. So It's unclear to me how that fits if challenged in court. So this would prevent, I think, having that kind of challenge for this position.
Senator Perschlick.
Thank you. Jim, on that point, And I think I asked this question before when we first went through the bill, and I can't remember the answer, sorry. And that is with the excess spending limitation. So this just allows them to joint fund it, but does it define it whether it is an education expense or a municipal expense as far as things like the excess spending limit that a school district?
This bill here does not go into excess spending. So you could go further and say that the cost to the school district of funding this cultural liaison position is not counted for excess spending. You could do that, but that's not what this bill does now.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing to add.
Any other questions? Senator Chittenden.
So on this point, and maybe it's not a time to discuss when we have witnesses here, but one question I'm going to have for you, Jim, is there in the language, or is there precedent for having qualifying conditions meet for when this can take effect? And does that then make it easier to abide by the current statutory language? For example, if we have a town that is the town with documentable large number of communities that need additional services like these, that would trigger the ability to do this, and then it wouldn't allow for blurring of town and school funding in other cases?
No, the case to be made substantively for having the position doesn't go to the issue of separation of funding. So you have a statute that says funding should be separated, but it doesn't define municipal services, doesn't define education spending. So you really don't know what it means. So this approach here that I've taken in terms of statute is to be careful that we don't violate that separation.
Any other questions? And then Senator Persick, we can certainly consider your point once we do markup, but I think it's it's an interesting one. Senator Persick, do you have any other anything you want to say before we move to the next witness? I know you're a co-sponsor of the bill.
Yeah, no, well, I think what I said last time we took it up is that I was just, when we did the tour, the education committee did a tour last year of Winooski School. And the first thing we did was sit in a room with, I think, 5 or 4 of the cultural liaisons, and they each explained what they did. And it was very eye-opening and impressive. And so based on that experience, if there's other towns or even Winooski, just so they can do more of it, I want to be as supportive as possible.
Great. Thank you. Terrific. Jesse, thank you. Aaron McGuire, Ms. McGuire, you are with the Vermont Council on Special Education Administrators, and you're here to also testify on this. And we've seen you before.
You have seen me before. Thank you for having me. I actually would like to amend the title I'm using to testify here today a little bit and articulate that I'm here as the Director of Equity and Inclusion for the Essex Westford School District. So representing sort of another school district in the state, while next door to Winooski, to speak to this need. I also serve as co-director of Student Support Services. And interestingly, as I've been listening to the testimony, it feels relevant to maybe touch the importance of how we use funds and how, when we have significant separation of funds and what they can and cannot be used for, it actually has significant impact on practice and how we engage with people as we implement services. That's true in special education, where there's been some requests to look at some more flexibility of how we use those funds to be able to serve more students, as opposed to being really rigid based on how we spend those funds. I also, for this committee's information, serve as the president of the Council of Administrators of Special Education at the national level, and so do hold an amount of expertise related to special education that doesn't apply as much here, just for your information, but really come to you today as a school district that is working very hard on a 9-component equity plan that incorporates really significantly community and school district engagement around around issues of equity, making sure that we are collaborative in our community toward these efforts. And it feels important to share that in order to address the issues for many populations, including refugees and immigrants and people who are multilinguistic in their diversity status, that we have what we need to support them not only in our schools, but also in our community. Essex has embarked on a recent project to bring some of the equity work into our community. And so we've been meeting really regularly with our municipality, and we are lifting up an equity committee that is designed of both the school district and the municipality. And the ability to do work together toward these efforts is enhanced by a bill like this to make sure that, for example, if we were to say, well, we need this and you need this and we'll fund this and you'll fund this, with this kind of statute, it makes it so that that person can only do this with these hours and only do that with those hours. And what we know is people and children are whole. They're not sometimes school and sometimes community. It's a whole student, a whole family. And our cultural liaisons are critical components of our support structure in our school district. They are not currently employed by our municipality, but as we have moved into equity work in a collaborative way to make sure that we're focusing on a sense of inclusion and belonging in our community as well as in our school district, there have been circumstances where I've reached into our translators and cultural liaisons to say, can you go do some part-time work for the municipality to translate this or to support this focus group or to try to gather feedback from members of the community who speak a different language or speak multiple languages so that we can make sure to have their voices at the table. And where we have funding structures that limit our collaboration between schools and communities, it makes me wonder about what exactly that is for. And why is it that we would want that, given that we talk consistently about the importance of the collaboration between schools and our communities and really desiring collaborative leadership going forward. So I do think that, making sure that we are able to be collective and not just collaborative in our impact by co-funding positions in ways that describe what the position will do, but not limiting when that happens or which timesheet gets submitted or who pays what, that we're able to be supportive of people. I think to Jesse's point, having people be full-time, increasing the number of people that we have available to do this very, very critical work that has impact for families, both as it relates to their community access and their school district, makes very good sense for me. I do wonder what other opportunities might exist in this space. So I know we're in a very sort of limited scope as we have a conversation about S27 on this topic. And it makes me wonder, and I've been wondering this as I've been a partner with the Essex municipality, both Essex Junction and Essex Town, in thinking forward together, what might be possible if this limitation didn't exist. And, sometimes structures do create limitation that don't necessarily help us forward. And so I do think this is one that is worth looking at, worth considering. I understand the importance of being clear about how we're spending tax dollars. Of course, that's important. It's important that we're able to be articulate about that. It's important that we are able to be held accountable to those issues. But assuming accountability has to mean separation, I think is an important question for us to be asking about this particular topic. I think without reiterating everything Jesse said, I'll just say that I completely agree from the school district perspective in another community that this has real benefit. And it is interesting to me that we've already been doing this within the context of SROs, and yet it requires action from the legislature for cultural liaisons. I just sort of came upon that as I was listening to this conversation, and that's an interesting observation, I think, to be made. So with that, happy to offer any answers to questions that you may have.
Good testimony. Any questions? Senator Lyons, please.
I don't actually have questions. I just wanted to say thank you to Aaron. We, in our county, I think Senator Chittenden and I both know how really effective you have been. The combination of Winooski and Essex being here today is super. It's really amazing. Thank you both. And Aaron, it's outstanding what you're doing. It's terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lyons. I appreciate that.
Terrific. Senator Hooker, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Aaron. I'm curious to know, Jesse, you mentioned making these positions full-time. Who would they be working for? Does that have to be a decision that's made up front? I mean, where does there, I know that the funding would be mixed, but who would they be responsible to, or who would their authority be?
Senator Hooker, I hear that question maybe for Jesse. Jesse, do you want to go ahead and respond?
Well, either of you.
I think Jesse is better situated to respond because Winooski has ventured forward further than Essex into this opportunity, and I'm really looking forward to exploring it more as I learn more about what they're doing. So hearing that from Jesse would be helpful for me too.
Sure, thank you. My perspective on that is that it would be up to the community to decide who held primary authority and then document, as we do with us using the SRO example, document through a memorandum of understanding or a shared services agreement that's executed between both elected bodies, school board and city council, how that cost would be split. So for example, using the SRO model, the SRO is a sworn Winooski police officer who is assigned to the school district during school hours. He is our employee, he carries our certification, and per our executed agreement between the city council and school committee, we have an understanding of how that cost is shared. In this example, I would imagine it would work in reverse in Winooski because that expertise started at the school, and that the need for ensuring that parents and children and teachers are connected is primary. Ensuring that information is shared, that those services are accessed as appropriately as possible would be the primary expertise, and then they would contract back with the city.
I would agree with that too, Jesse. I think that because our cultural liaisons are situated presently in our school district, that would likely be the case. And I don't, at this point, see the readiness for our municipal partner to be hiring the majority of the position necessarily at this point, but more an extension of the role out into the community from the district where that design was created to begin with. Yeah.
Okay. And so my understanding is that this bill would just enable communities to do this, and you'd have to go to the voters in order to get their consent to mix these funds and hire these positions?
Or would it just be part of the approved budget?
I understood that it would be part of the approved budget. So for example, when I present my budget around equity and support for English language learners, that we are thinking about this as part of our budget and then expressing the intent to create a memorandum of understanding, for example, for the remainder of the position with the municipality, and that they would be having that same conversation. I think for me, the real impetus here is to make sure that we're not controlling what people can do with their hours at any given time, and it's truly a collaborative effort, right? I mean, we can hire someone in the school district and then they can go and work for the municipality for the rest of their day. There's nothing that stops some of those like designs now. It's just that this kind of statute limits what you can do in a truly collaborative way with a whole person and a whole position around a whole family, recognizing that you're meeting both needs at one time, and suddenly have this need to kind of bifurcate your work in some way because it's school and then community.
Senator Chiaranzini.
I was just going to say that how Ms. Baker described the MOU between the school district and the municipality for an SRO program. That's exactly how we did it in my local municipality. and it makes a lot of sense how it works. It's clean, it's transparent. You know where the funding's coming from, and it seems like that would work in a position like this, in my opinion, if it was legal. And I would defer to Jim, of course, for that. But
Terrific. Any other questions? Senator Lyons, please.
Yeah, a question came to mind for each of you, and that is, as you have the liaison, the work going on, is it possible, or have you documented some of the benefits to the community? So over time, it would seem to me it would save, money. That's always the bottom line, but also save some of the social concerns, the substance use issues that we see in our communities, and then the acceleration of some of these folks into educational work that they might not otherwise have been able to get to or gain. So, do you keep any outcomes-based records, or do you have any evidence for how effective this has been? And I don't know the answer to that. I speculate that there's a lot of good data out there, but I don't know how you capture it given the type of position.
Thank you, Senator Lyons, for that question. It's a great question. I think that, so first of all, I should say that I would encourage you to reach out to our superintendent or our director of ELL services in Winooski. I'm sure they track data on the time that the liaisons work on different things, and I'm sure they'd have more specific examples for you. I think from the city side perspective, or my perspective, one, I think these positions do save money ultimately in other state services not needed to be accessed because people are receiving the right level of service at the right time. I also think, quite frankly, it elevates people's engagement with their own lives and their engagement with their own capacity and long-term contributions to the community. So I think it's as much about saving money as it is about increasing community involvement and fulfilling of one's own destiny. I think on a data side, what I can share is that, and this isn't a direct correlation, but I think it is a contributing factor for both of our COVID outbreaks, our COVID outbreak in May and June, and our COVID outbreak in December and January. Our numbers in our LEP communities, our limited English proficiency communities, spiked, and we brought in the community partners, the people who had relationships in community and were being paid to do these jobs, and you see a precipitous decline. So you see that when you insert the service in a language that is accessible to folks, things improve very quickly. So that's the one kind of data point I will share.
And yeah, that's amazing, actually. And then it would be interesting to look at any police-related issues, reduced engagement with public safety, law enforcement in a negative way. But thank you.
Great. Anything else? Any other comments or questions? Okay, not seeing anything. Ms. Baker, Ms. McGuire, thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it. It's an important topic, and certainly sounds like it can. This bill could be a real asset to your communities, without a doubt. So, if we have any additional questions, or if we make any adjustments, please, if you be willing just to continue to track our work. And we also know that the two of you are there and ready to work with us, which is great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All of you.
Bye.
Terrific. Committee, we are now moving, as we know, our educational landscape in Vermont has public schools, home schools, our academies, independent schools. So we've not heard anything yet from Mill Moore. Mr. Moore, it's great to see you.
Thank you for inviting us in, Senator.
Well, I appreciate you being in touch, and you are all certainly play an important role in the lives of the education of many Vermonters. And so we're grateful for you to come in and just give us, starting with an overview of your work, the kinds of things we might partner with you on, and also where you're seeing things as it relates to COVID right now in our independent institutions. And the other thing I know that we're going to be hearing afterward, Drew, how do I pronounce your last name? You're muted, Drew. We still can't hear you, Drew.
It's pronounced Gradinger.
Gradinger. Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Gradinger is here with Mr. Moore and will be adding, possibly adding testimony if we end up hearing from him.
Can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. And Mr. Gradinger is specifically going to respond to S16, the school discipline bill, for lack of a better title at this point, after Mr. Desmarais takes us through our new version. But first, Mr. Moore.
Thank you, Senator. Good afternoon, senators on the committee. Thanks for the opportunity to come in and introduce ourselves. The Vermont Independent Schools Association is the advocacy group analogous to the other educational stakeholder groups that represents the independent schools community, which overall educates about 1 in every 10 students in grades K through 12 in Vermont. I've got two slides that I'd like to show you by way of giving you an overview. This is always an adventure when you try to share screens, so here goes. Oh, it says the host has disabled my screen sharing.
Jeannie's in a bad mood today. I think she's just not going to. Jeannie's never in a bad mood, actually.
Oh, that's not true. But I was busy doing something else. I'm sorry. Just give me a minute.
No need to apologize.
So, Mr. Moore, you are now co-host. You can share your document. Let me know if you need help.
All right. Let's see here. I've got too much on my screen now. Let me see if I can figure out what's going on. Okay, I hope folks can see that. At the top of the screen, it says Vermont Independent Schools, 126 schools, 8,100 students. That's the summary, but I'm going to start from the bottom and work my way up. So across the bottom row, there are 36 general purpose schools that enroll about half of the total, around 4,800 students. Another, what I term special purpose schools, most of them are the winter sports academies with around 500 students. Then there's a cluster of the religious schools, which I know have been much on your minds lately. A dozen of the Roman Catholic schools, another 7 other schools affiliated with other denominations. They total out to 19 schools on the next row with a couple thousand students. So we're moving up to that next row, beginning to summarize. We've got the approved religious schools. These are schools with state approval. Approved general education schools total, that's the special purpose schools plus the general purpose schools. And these are all schools that meet the approval requirements established by the State Board of Education. Then off on the left side is that orange box, and this is the one that Drew will be able to speak to better than I because he leads a therapeutic special education school. There's 31 of those with about 800 students. These are students whose disabilities are so serious that they are no longer able to be served adequately in their original home school location. So they are now being served in a school that is operated with facilities and programs expressly designed to meet those serious disabilities. To the next level up, there are recognized schools versus approved schools. If a school chooses not to meet the standards imposed by the State Board of Education, then it is classified as a recognized school. Every school in Vermont has to be either recognized or approved. To be recognized, the school has to report once a year to the State Agency of Education, rather, and report its enrollment so that students will not be held truant if they're not on the record someplace as actually attending school. So overall, looking at this picture, what you see is something that's very different from the public schools community. You see a much wider diversity of educational philosophies. You see a much wider diversity of missions and purposes. And you see the divergence between the approved and the recognized schools. So when I'm speaking about the independent schools community generally, there's a lot going on. And I encourage you to avoid adopting assumptions based on your experience with the public schools when you're approaching the independent schools community, because it operates rather differently. And the most fundamental difference is that all of the attendance at these schools is voluntary. Everybody in an independent school has chosen to be there, and that really affects a lot of the management and operation of the schools from the management side, and also the attitude of those who are in the schools, because they have chosen to be there. They are not there involuntarily. They are there because they've made that distinct choice that that is the position, the location best for them. Now I'm going to see if I can remember how to unshare and go back to where I belong. There we are. That is the basic overview. Schools are scattered all over the state. As you might expect, there are more in the population centers such as Burlington or Rutland and St. Johnsbury, but you're going to find independent schools in some pretty out of the way places. So it's a community that's diverse and it's geographically well dispersed around Vermont. So that, Mr. Chairman, is the brief overview. Shall I go on now and talk about S61?
Do you mean S16?
S16, excuse me.
No, I just wanted to make sure. Any questions on independent schools? Yes, please, Senator Chittenden.
I was listening, but could you give me a better idea, maybe with not example names, but example reasons? Why would a school choose to be only recognized and not approved? What are the driving distinction between not going through that approval process?
Could be cost. It could be a desire to avoid government oversight. There are some religious schools that certainly feel that way. They want to keep the government at some distance from their school and from their philosophy. Those are the two principal reasons. The principal reason for wanting to be involved are two, or wanting to be approved are two. One is it's an indication to families that are choosing that school that the school has met some standards. And second, it makes the schools eligible to receive public funds from tuitioning districts if they're near a district. Of course, in some parts of the state, there are no nearby tuitioning districts, whereas in other parts of the state, there are quite a few.
My follow-up, and not necessarily a question, but I would love guidance from either Jim or the chair, where I could better understand what questions and how rigorous that approval process is, and what kind of questions and certifications occur when a school is approved. But maybe that's for another day.
It is all written into statute. It's in 16 VSA 166B.
And we can get that for you, Senator Chittenden. That's something that Mr. Desmarais, if Jim's willing, in the next few days. If not, I'm happy to also pull that up. Mr. Moore, one question I had. So is it safe to say, though, all of our schools approved, whatever their sort of status, independence, everybody's faculty are all getting FBI background checks, everybody, health checks in terms of what, what the kitchen is looking like, that kind of general stuff?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. And where do our academies fall in this? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Well, that's just an informal term of art, Senator Campion. They're all independent schools, but the term town academies is often used, and that refers to schools that in a particular location have made a commitment to do all the things that a public school would do, in addition to whatever other mission they feel is important. An example of that would be Burton Academy in Bennington County, or St. Johnsbury Academy, or Thetford Academy. We have both elementary schools and high schools that fulfill that. And by the chief things that they have to do to qualify in that role is have an open admissions program. It usually applies to their home district, and meet state approval standards, of course, provide special education.
Senator Hooker.
Just a quick question on whether or not recognized schools are able to take public funds for tuition.
No, they are not.
Is there a difference between recognized and approved schools and their abilities to take public funds?
Yeah, that's substantial. Recognized schools are not eligible for public funds.
They're not. Just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
That's a good question. Senator Chin.
So, Senator Campion, you asked about the health and safety, the inspections, like the food and kitchens. Those do apply. Those certifications or those processes are happening with the unrecognized schools. Is that what I heard you say?
No, those do not apply to recognized schools. They apply to approved schools.
Oh, thank you for that clarification, Senator Chinden. I was under the impression that everybody at least had, no matter what school, FBI background check, health inspection, and that's not the case.
That's not the case.
Somebody could open a very small school, not want it approved. The children go to that school every day, and some of those kinds of those things are not required.
That was established by a Supreme Court opinion back in 1923.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Moore. Good to see you. And we are going to move into S16. We worked on S16, was it just a couple of days ago? Yes, Senator Lyons, please.
I didn't know if Drew Gradinger was going to be talking about the specific category of school.
Yes, I was asked to come and speak specifically about therapeutic schools.
Oh, terrific. Thank you. I did not know that. Why don't we do that
That's
first
okay.
before we move into S16?
All right, thanks for the opportunity.
You're welcome.
I know it's Friday afternoon. Last time I testified, I think I almost passed out cookies and coffee because I know it gets long. So I appreciate you being here and representing our great state and allowing us to speak. So I'm Drew Gradinger. I'm the head of school for Kindle Farm. And we're a division of Windham and Windsor County's designated agency, HCRS. There are roughly 30 therapeutic schools in Vermont, and about half of them are Vermont Care Partners designated agency schools, and the other half are approved independent schools. Together, we serve about 800 students, and these are the kids that need our help the most. These are the kids whose districts have spent a great deal of time and money in the IEP process trying to support their kids in-house as they should, least restrictive environment. And after a great deal of effort have determined that that's not working for the student, and then our therapeutic schools are an option for these IEP and 504 students. So what a privilege it is to go above and beyond for these most needy kids. It's been my mission. I've been here 25 years, and what a privilege. And I did a little research. You know, almost all of you have some of these schools in your county. In Washington County, you have Maple Hill, Choice Academy. In Rutland, you have Howard Center's Fay Honey Knopp. In Chittenden, you have the Baird Center, Gene Garvin, and Centerpoint. So you probably know us one way or another. Today, I was able to listen to the Secretary of Education, and I don't think anyone needs a lesson that COVID is wreaking havoc on our kids. A large majority of our kids are not in school full time. Some are not in school at all. The vast majority of therapeutic schools are in person, working 5 days a week because our kids need it. Our ratios are high. We have high staff to student ratio, and we're nimble and flexible. And this is kind of what we do. And that's because our students are at the most risk of this pandemic. They have established disabilities, mental health history, acute developmental and educational needs. And then you compound this with the fact that, at least at Kindle Farm, 78% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. And I think that's likely true for the vast majority of our schools, which make food security an issue, internet access an issue, and parents challenged with paying phone bills, having internet, driving kids where they need to go. At Kindle Farm, which I believe represents many of us, in-person learning is the priority to get these guys both emotionally, behaviorally, and academically going through this pandemic. And we're able to deliver on this mission pretty fun. Our ratios, at least at Kindle Farm, are 1 adult for 3 kids, and classroom density during COVID's an obvious hurdle. So this pandemic has really challenged us all. Transportation for most of our schools are on these 7-person minivans, which used to be able to have 5 or so kids. Now we're talking a max of 2 kids. Wearing PPE, we thought would be horrible on kids. They were so excited to come back that wearing masks was not a giant issue, but it does get in the way for kids with sensory issues, kids' ability to read facial expression, and a lot of things they typically use to ameliorate some developmental disabilities and things like that. We also see kids during the pandemic weaponizing the masks, bodily fluids, and things like that, because we're all afraid of getting COVID. And for Kindle Farm, in order to bring all our students in, we had to create an entirely new program starting in July and be ready in September. 3/5 of our kids are off campus, either in our farm, in the community, or we have 1-day distance learning so that they can practice those skills in the case that we had to go virtual. That's been going really well. But let me be really clear. Our staff are mission driven in all these schools, and we're excited to serve our students in person because they're often resistant to school, but most of our students are pretty eager to get back after 6 months. I think sometimes you don't know what you've got till it's gone. As an administrator, we're really dealing with COVID fears, both for kids, families, and staff. We serve 15 districts in 7 counties and 2 states. So we're really got a wide geographic swath coming into the school. And so if that were to have an outbreak, that would go out to a wide distribution, and that's a little scary. And our therapeutic role necessitates close proximity because we have to be aware of students. These kids are often sent to us because they're not safe in their environment, and so we have to be close to ensure safety. And then also for reading, writing, because that's often difficult for our kids in occupational therapy type schools. And despite this, our therapeutic schools are not labeled 1A in the vaccinations, and I'm really on other avenues really trying to advocate for these special schools to get vaccinated, because we are right in the heart of all that. But we do see even our students with all our goods suffering the most because some of our kids don't attend, but we're able to, as a nimble school, do house visits and send our staff right to the communities where they are. And we're so good at positive reinforcement and reward and really trying to get kids engaged. But we are seeing high incidence of crisis calls, truancies, and parents pulled in so many directions that schooling isn't their top priority. So, in the end, all those challenges aside, therapeutic schools are providing in-person services at the emotional educational level and reducing the negative effects of COVID-19 on these kids who need it most. We're able to relieve families of having their children navigate distance learning. We're really supporting food insecurity and developing the whole child during a time of disconnect. We're primed to connect, advocate, and build relationships. And I think one of the things that some colleagues wanted me to say is, this intervention that's happening right now in real time really is able to stem larger costs of residential treatment, adjudication, and all the costs associated with kids not getting these basic needs met and not learning these new skills. So what a privilege it is to be working at one of these schools, and thanks for taking a little time to hear about it. The last time I presented at the Educational Committee, most of the committee was not aware that these therapeutic schools were kind of lumped into independent schools as a whole. And so even though I'm president of Visa and an active member for independent schools, I also have a role in kind of distinguishing the needs of the therapeutic community from some of the other schools. And so I appreciate the time.
Thank you very much. Senator Lyons.
Thank you. That's really very helpful. The question I have is how the schools are supported. Where does the money come from? Basically, obviously, it's at the Baird Center, and so there's a significant amount of public dollars that goes into that whole area. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about the funding streams for that.
I can speak to that pretty well. So if you're a designated agency, one of those 14 schools, you're able to get Medicaid in a different way from the rest of the schools. So we're able to, at Kindle Farm, we're able to leverage a little bit of Medicaid. Other schools use a cert rate, and almost their entire funding, or a large part of their funding, can come from the mental health side of things. For the other schools, and for Kindle Farm too, it's tuition to the local district. So the districts have to go to their town, predict how many kids are out of placement, and get approved in the budget. That's true for Kindle Farm and a vast majority of those schools in their special ed town budgets. So those are the two kind of revenue streams there. Thank you.
How many students, I'm wondering, of those 800 students, are some of those residential students coming from out of state, maybe New Hampshire or Massachusetts, where students are being placed?
That's a good question. I do not know the answer to that.
So right now you have day students? Is that what you have there?
We at Kindle Farm is only day students. The vast majority of us are only day students, but I don't think all. And now that the retreat has closed, there's a lot of pressure down here to expand services and kind of make up for that loss.
And what about the Bennington School? Is that considered therapeutic? That's a girls' school now. It used to be a co-ed residential. I would say maybe quasi-therapeutic.
I think Mill can speak better to out of state and the Bennington School than I can.
Yeah, it used to be the Bennington School. It's now called the Vermont School for Girls. It is a residential program, and it is a special ed program.
Okay, thank you. Other questions?
I can also add to your question, Senator, about people coming in from across state lines. There is a fair amount of that goes on up and down the Connecticut River Valley. Special education students coming into Vermont at various points in the valley. There's a lot of special ed money flowing both ways between Vermont and New Hampshire, and somewhat less between Vermont and Massachusetts.
1/4 of our students are from New Hampshire, but it's just a day program.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Senator Hooker.
So, Mr. Moore, is the Vermont School for Girls part of the independent school system, or is it a function of the state? And is the funding different from Kindle Farm?
It is an independent school. It's part of our association. Some of their placements are made by DCF, girls who are in the children in need of supervision, found to be that way through the court system. Others are placed as special ed placements.
And so they would be paid for by tuition from their district?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I do want to just go ask Jim, if you don't mind, Jim Demaray. I know we were talking about recognized schools not having to need background checks, but I'm thinking 16 VSA 255 might actually require recognized but not approved independent schools do need background checks. But I'm wondering if you could just check that for me.
Sure, yep.
You can get back to us. I just want to make sure that throughout, the state, at least.
Well, it does read, superintendents, headmasters, recognized or approved independent schools in their contracts to show request criminal record checks. So,
okay, so everybody
needs to cover them. Yep.
That's good to hear. I saw everyone's face kind of blank when they thought there might be a carve out, including mine. Yeah.
So I was mistaken on that.
But that's okay. I've been mistaken about half a dozen times today, so no problem at all. Any other questions? Terrific. Well, thank you. We will now move on to S16. And I'm thinking perhaps the best way to do this is to first hear from, I know that there's a time limit with one of our witnesses. So perhaps what we can do is have our two witnesses, Drew and Mill, just talk a little bit about their thoughts on S16, the School Discipline Advisory Council. And then what we'll have is, as a committee, we'll have Jim go through the new draft that we worked on. Since I think we didn't really touch much on the independent school language in the original bill. So if the two of you would, given also that you have some time constraints, if you both would like to weigh in, that would be much appreciated.
Sure, I will start, and I just have a brief thing, and then I'll ask Drew to pick up after that. We would like to have in the bill a requirement that an independent school representative be named to the council. Actually, two representatives, one from a general ed school perspective and one from the special ed schools. Independent schools are required to report, as you know, and probably will be required under whatever measures the Agency of Education chooses to take in compliance with this proposed bill. So we think that the independent community needs to be represented here. The special ed schools have additional, more intense and different kinds of school dismissal issues to deal with. And so that's why I'm asking that they also be represented. And that's up to Drew to explain.
Thank you.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to advocate that a therapeutic school be one of those schools because they have the experience working with kids with trauma and knowing the effects of trauma, building relationships. They have access to the mental health resources and coordination, and they are championing restorative practices and community integration. It's also really interesting to think when I read the bill, we do occasionally suspend a child for a day or two when they've been physically unsafe or by public school standards, pretty high level. And it's not of punishment, but to have a team approach with the parents, the therapist, understanding what it is and how to come back and work with the child. So I just think that a therapeutic school would offer a lot of perspective on their practices and best practices in general. So that's just a little point of advocacy. I'm pretty excited about the bill. I think it's great.
Okay. Any committee questions or comments for our two witnesses on S16 or anything else that they've already mentioned or discussed? Okay, seeing no hands. I want to thank you both very much for taking the time to come in today. It was a great overview as well as testimony on S16. And please continue to watch our work, and at any point that you want to weigh in, I hope you'll reach out to Jeannie or me or a member of the committee.
Thank you so much for your time, Senators. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Committee, why don't we just take a 10-minute break? We'll come back at 2:35. And at that point, Jim will go through our new version of S16. Thank you. Okay. Hope everybody had a good break. S16, Jeannie was kind enough to email it around to everybody so that you have it fresh right in front of you. Hoping that Mr. Desmarais will now take us through this new draft, knowing that we will have additional changes, of course, but hopefully this will move us in the direction of where people feel most comfortable. So with that, Jim, take it away.
Okay. So should I try screen share this? Would you like that on screen too?
I mean, I have it right in front of me. Does everybody have it? Anybody need it up on the screen?
No, but I do have a question on what's draft.
Please.
Is the draft that Jeannie just sent out different than the draft that was posted to our committee page? Like, is that yet another new draft?
No, it's identical. It should be absolutely identical.
Okay.
Is that correct? Yeah.
That's correct.
There was just the one change, our one meeting. I didn't make any changes. I don't think anybody else recommended any changes. So I believe they're both exactly the same. So thank you. Good question.
Okay. So for the record, Jim Desmarais, the council, we're going through your strike all amendment to S16. The language in the findings has not changed, so I'll skip by those unless you want to go through findings. No. Section 2 on page 4 is where the changes begin. And what this does is it incorporates Secretary French's recommendation with some of the elements from Senator Sears' original bill. I will say that Secretary French's recommendations are the same recommendations that were made by the Racial Equity Task Force. So to the extent that the task force recommendations are brought into a bill, they're much broader than just education. They cut across different policy areas. You will be seeing similar language, or you might be seeing similar language elsewhere. Okay. So
just to clarify, so you said it's the same language. The racial
same language where Secretary French presented and what the Racial Task Force presented are the same.
Thank you.
What you've done is a bit different because you're combining that concept with some of Senator Sears' concepts.
I see.
So on page 4, line 5, this is now session law, not going to statute, not being codified. There is created the Task Force on School Discipline Reform. The task force shall, in conjunction with the Agency of Education, make recommendations to end suspensions and expulsions for all but the most serious student behaviors. If I pause there, that is from Secretary French and from the Racial Equity Task Force. And then going on from there, and collect and analyze data is coming from Senator Sears' bill. So it says, and collect and analyze data relevant regarding school discipline in Vermont, public and approved independent schools, in order to inform strategic planning, guide statewide and local decision-making and resource allocation, and measure the effect of statewide and local policies and practices. The membership is composed of the secretary.
Let's just pause there for a moment, see if anybody has any questions at this point or concerns, anything that they want to raise. I mean, the only thing that jumps out to me is make recommendations to end suspensions and expulsions for all but the most serious student behaviors. You know, I could see a question on the floor for a definition of what those behaviors are, and I don't know if there's a way or to explain that, or if it's important to leave it broad like that.
I believe this bill goes on to require a definition of those behaviors.
Thank you very much.
And if it doesn't, I think it might. If it doesn't, you can add that. So,
thank you, Jim.
Yeah. Membership of the task force is the Secretary of Education, and not more than 20 members appointed by the Secretary of Education, who shall be Vermont residents and shall be educators, administrators, high school students, special educators, parents of students, school board members, and members of community groups working in areas of racial justice and school discipline reform. You should probably pause there, membership. Before pausing, let me go through the next diversity requirement. It says the secretary shall seek in making appointments to the task force racial diversity in membership, and shall include reps of public and approved independent schools, to the point raised earlier. And that's where you could add, if you chose to, including therapeutic schools.
Senator Terence.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If we could go back to page 4 under that section 2. And I apologize to committee because I'm still really learning, the bill language and so on. But the version I'm looking at now, which Jeannie sent out versus what we had, this would be the most up-to-date version that would be submitted for the committee to vote on and then moved on to the Senate to vote on, correct?
Yeah, I mean, just for clarification, I'm not sure if this helps, but we wouldn't be voting on this today. What I anticipate is more edits, more changes, and maybe if things were to work out, maybe later next week, we might get to something that we would send to the floor.
So one thing that I didn't see in the first version that's in the second version is under that section 2, my idea of this concept was to form a study committee for the next couple of years to look at the data and analyze it. Now, if I'm reading this correctly, under section 2, it is saying the task force shall, in conjunction with the Agency of Education, make recommendations to end suspensions and expulsions for all but most serious student behaviors. I guess we heard that as testimony, but why would that be in the bill? And it's almost like we're declaring that the task force shall make recommendations to end suspensions. Wouldn't we want them to make that determination? I just don't understand why it's in here. Does that make sense?
Yes, Senator Purcell.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I think it's a very logical question. And the reason that I wanted to have it in there is because there have already been several task forces, if you want to call them, or looks at this, and they've said that these expulsions and suspensions are detrimental, basically. And that's like what the Secretary of Education, on his professional opinion, seemed to be agreeing, that we do need to move to that. But instead of just saying in the law, you shall end them, we don't know where the line is, because there's definitely some serious behavior where you'd want a suspension. And we're saying, in general, these have not been helpful. So figure out where that line is, and how do you get there from where we are now, where we use them, to where we don't use them. And so it seems like we are saying we're agreeing with the studies that have been done that they're not helpful, but we want this task force to figure out how to get there. Instead of, because I just don't think another task force to look at it is necessary at this point. It seems like all the ones that have looked at it have said it's not a good practice.
Senator Lyons, did you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, no, so do we want to say something like that? Like, something about the previous task forces, and this one is to take the next step?
I believe those are in the findings already. I
It
think
is in the findings, so,
Senator
Okay.
Terenzini, does this help?
Well, it helps. I just think that maybe I'll hold more of my thoughts for now, and we can let Jim continue on, and maybe we can revisit. I don't exactly know what the proper procedure is when you're this close to a bill, if there's a debate amongst the committee or whatever, but I can hold my thoughts for now.
Okay, if you want to hold them for now, but we can always stop and pause and have discussions. Senator Hooker, were you going to say something?
Just that in our previous discussions, we talked about not wanting to wait 2 years for the task force to come up with recommendations.
Right.
And I think Senator Perchlik pointed out that, there are other studies that the task force can look at to implement, start implementing the process and still collect data. I think certainly that was my concern, was that the data would continue to be collected so that we could see that what kind of an effect any of these changes had.
Yeah. Okay, Jim?
Okay, so.
Oh, you asked.
I do still have, I guess I now have a question on that, because it says that they'll make recommendations to end suspensions. So who are they making recommendations to?
The report, we're not there yet, but the report will come to you.
So I think that's, to Senator Terenzini's point, if the recommendations are just recommendations and not ending these tools, if you want to call them that, then there's still that opportunity if you're concerned about that.
Good point. Okay, let's continue. Well, let's just talk first about membership, and then I think some of this, hopefully, we might at the end might make us feel a little bit better as we go forward. Maybe some of the concerns that are being raised still will be concerns. But as it relates to membership, how do senators feel about that? The size, the makeup? I guess I look to Senator Terenzini.
We're at the bottom of page 4, Senator Campion, for clarification.
That's correct.
Yeah, I guess I once again asked the question. I mean, it looks like we really did consolidate quite a bit from version 1 to this, if I'm correct. But I once again, I guess I don't know if it's a deal breaker in my eyes, but to have high school students on it, once again, I'll make the same comment I made about having parents of students that have been suspended. I just don't know. I mean, obviously, in my opinion, a high school student could be biased that they're not in favor of suspension, and they're not. So I just don't know if there's value in that. And this comes from a person who was a student school board member, and I appreciate the student involvement greatly.
Right.
But in a decision of discipline, I don't know if that's the right seat for a high school student to be sitting at, is all I'm saying.
In this case, and Jim, correct me on this, but are we requiring that, we're saying 20 members appointed by the Secretary of Education. So yes, so it'll be Vermont residents and representation from each of these groups.
Right. Yeah.
Up to 20 members. So you would have special educators, parents of students, just general parents of students, right? High school students. Now in this draft, I haven't read beyond, but is this high school students that have experienced expulsions and suspensions, or just high school students?
It's, as drafted, it's just high school students.
Just
So
high school students. Okay. All right. Senator Lyons?
So two things. I think somehow saying something about balanced representation from the following would be helpful. And this, that. And then, but the other thing is, so I can understand what Senator Terenzini is saying, that there might be some bias on the part of high school students, but in my experience, there are also some high school students who have actually taken over and developed a judicial process to evaluate and to put in place some disciplinary rules. So, if you select the right group, they may have some more, some creative ideas about not so much this kind of discipline is bad or that kind of discipline is bad, but rather a framework and a process to put in place within a school that would engage the students in a different way. So just something to think about.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. It's yeah, something to consider. Yes, Senator.
Just to try to bring this to some moving forward point, I would say the language yesterday, I completely agree, Senator Terenzino, was too narrow with the type of high school student that had an incident. I like this because it really empowers the board, the Secretary of Education, to find the right high schoolers that will help contribute and get us to the actual objective where we are. So I think it's vague enough that it'll be a well-suited high school student and not necessarily that narrow, pigeonholed, specific student with an experience that was in the yesterday version.
For new senators and even returning, I can't answer this question. How will the Secretary of Education go about finding high school students, Jim, usually? I mean, on other committees, for example, for natural resources, and I'm sure health and welfare, Senator Lyons might be able to help us with this. How do they usually, they're usually quite specific, some of the studies for natural resource and energy, but this is pretty broad. How does the Secretary, and maybe this is a question for the Secretary.
I think it is. I mean, the Secretary meets with the so-called Bs, all the advocacy groups every week, and I would imagine he'd tap into them and say, "Can you give me some recommendations?" But that's up to him to answer.
Yeah, no, I was just curious about that a little bit. Senator Lyons, we're going to weigh in? No. Okay. Go ahead.
So we're going to go on to page 5, line 6. About powers and duties. So again, it says task force shall make recommendations to end suspensions and expulsions for all but the most serious student behaviors and shall perform the following tasks. The first 4 tasks are from Secretary French and the Racial Equity Task Force. The remaining tasks on the next page are from Senator Sears' bill. The first 4 review in-school services and availability of these services in various SUs, approved independent schools and regions of the state that are available to support students who would otherwise face exclusionary discipline. 2, recommend additional or more uniform in-school services that should be available to students who would otherwise face exclusionary discipline. 3, define the most serious behaviors that, after considering all other alternatives and supports, should remain eligible for suspension or expulsion. 4, identify best practice procedures that minimize law enforcement contacts for students facing in-school or exclusionary discipline. Next, page 5 goes on to, page 6, but number 5 goes on to Senator Sears' points. Which is about data. 5 says, analyze current data collection definitions and practices used in Vermont for misconduct and for disciplinary actions that result in a student's exclusion from the classroom and develop standard definitions and practices as necessary for the collection of all appropriate data related to school discipline. And then 6, analyze on a school district and approved independent school basis the available data regarding suspensions and expulsions, and identify, collect, and analyze additional data necessary to inform the work of the task force, including A, total number of instances of expulsions and suspensions in each grade operated by the district or approved independent school. B, the total number of students in each grade operated by the district or approved independent school who were expelled or suspended, and the number of instances of expulsion or suspension, or both, for each student. C, the duration of each instance of expulsion and suspension. D, the infraction. And E, each instance of referral to local law enforcement authorities. And 7, share insights and best practices with Vermont educators, school administrators, policymakers, agencies, and education advocacy organizations. Can I pause there before we go on?
Any questions, comments? Senator Pershing?
Yeah, number 7 seems just worded differently than other statute that I'm familiar with, where it just says, share insights and best practices with all these different people. And maybe we're okay with it being that broad. I don't have a specific suggestion right now, but it just strikes me as a very broad kind of general charge. And maybe we're okay with that, but I just want to flag it and think about it a little more.
I mean, what I like about it, and it might just be the language that we need to change. Of course, I'm open to even, of course, removing it. But I anytime we can share information and research and ideas with different groups, I like when we as a state do those kinds of things. But
definitely, but usually you have it like as part of a report or like just sharing insights.
I see what you mean.
How are they going to share?
That's a great point. Yeah. So it is so broad that,
do we want to make that as part of the report, that the report shall have these insights and best practices, and then that the whole report is shared with these folks or something like that?
I think, Jim, if you wouldn't mind kind of getting some language that would get us a little more specific, a little more greater specificity, greater direction, would be helpful there.
Yeah, sure. I think one option is to have the agency post a report on its website and maintain it so people can see it.
And
Senator Pershing?
Well, I was just going to say, if Jim thought that number 7 would be kind of automatically a part of the report, or is number 7 different than the report?
Well, the report requirements next, actually, it's on page 7. And it's being a report to you with its findings and recommendations. So we can put in the report requirement more detail as to what the report has to specify. And then you can also make AOE post it on its website so it's available to everybody.
I mean, the posting thing, I think it's fine. I just don't know how people get there. In other words, what would prompt somebody to check the website? It's like so much research that's out there. I said yesterday, I think in terms of education, how do you get people to the site? But Senator Chittenden?
I'm going to always reflect on experiences like my city council role. And I would say in this case, I'd go with deference to the agency of education. And I like the language in that encouraging the sharing of this information and somewhat leave it to them to communicate it in the right channel. So I think the language charges the sharing, and then hopefully the secretary would then integrate it into whatever communication modes would make the most sense for his expertise and understanding how the agency functions.
Well, I really like also what Senator Chittenden's his final comments, where he said, direct the agency of education to share it in the way that they, I don't exactly, find it to be the most efficient, most broad, something like that. Senator Perchlik?
And well, it's the task force that's doing the sharing. So, that's not necessarily the secretary.
Well,
we could think it would be the secretary. I just didn't know, I'm willing to think about it some more and think about what the right language is, but I agree with what Senator Chittenden said. We want to give them that leeway, the best of their professional opinion. But right now, this is the task of the task force, which the secretary isn't a member of, and the task force isn't even reporting to the secretary. So we should just make sure we have them doing what we want them to do.
Based on your discussion, it sounds like we should take out 7 as a task force requirement and put it under the next section on the reporting and make it be a requirement of the agency to share.
I think that's a great step.
Yeah.
What do you think, Senator Perchlik?
Yeah, no, that sounds good. But
Yeah.
we just want to make sure that I guess we want to have the task force identify what these are, and then that it's included in the report, which I guess maybe goes without saying that if it's in the report, they've identified it and that the report shall be shared with these entities, but we leave it up to them how to share the report, to Senator Chittenden's point.
Yeah. The AOEs obviously will be there forever, and this task force goes away in a year. So, yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
Okay. So my lettering got off here. The next section report should be E, not F, so I'll have to fix that. But the report is due to you on or before November 30 of this year. Now, I can expand that section as we talked about. Meetings are standard, so the first meeting would be August 1st this year. The task force would not meet more than 6 times. Would have the assistance of the Agency of Education, and they would be reimbursed through their standard per diem and reimbursement of expenses. Appropriations blank.
For new senators, so just say something about the per diem. Is that for, and for a reminder for all of us, that's for each member?
Yeah, each member who's not otherwise compensated gets a per diem. I believe it's $50 a day, and then reimbursements based on mileage and
right.
Okay.
So, if, for example, a legislator were on it, would a legislator get the per diem? Yes.
They would if the legislator is serving on a task force or committee outside of the session, the normal session, they get reimbursement.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Senator Perchlik?
Jim, on the recommendation for legislative action on E, what F should be E on line 6, is is it your understanding that we would need legislative action to not have suspensions and expulsions be happening? Does that need to be legislative, or could the Agency of Education or the Board of Education do that without legislation?
You would need to revise current statute for that. In current statute, those requirements are on this, and they'd be different, I think, if you went this direction.
Okay.
Okay. Section 3 is the appropriation. We don't know how much it's for. We know it's going to cover per diem and reimbursement, but there are other expenses that council may have in collecting data, for example. So we have to hear from the agency as to what that number might be.
Okay.
So I left that blank. Page 8, section 4 is about data collection. It says on before the first meeting of the task force, the secretary shall collect and distribute to members all readily available data on suspensions and expulsions from each Vermont public school and approved independent school in academic years 2013 through 2019. Included the data specified in subdivision D6 of section 2. So D6 on the previous page, you go back to page 6, line 6, there's a lot of detail as to the data that the task force needs to analyze, and that's the data that the secretary has to produce for them.
Jim, I'm sorry to interrupt. For new senators, can all the education statutes be found online in case people ever want to cross-reference, or should I get education?
So if you go to the General Assembly website, there is a tab for kind of existing laws, Vermont laws. If you tap on that, you'll find a link to all the statutes. So 1 through 32, Title 1 through 32 are there online, and the statute the title you want to go to is 16. 16 has all the education statutes in it.
What I love is every time I have a question, I say it's for new senators, but really it's partly for me. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so we're on page 8 again. We're on line 11, subsection B.
Yeah.
So this says on before July 1, 2022, the Secretary of Education and the State Board shall incorporate the task force standard definitions and practices developed in subdivision D5 into their data collection rules, procedures, to the extent permitted by privacy laws, and shall require the collection of data as recommended by the task force beginning with the 23-24 school year. So D5, we're talking about there, going back to page 6 on line 1, task force is supposed to analyze current data collection definitions and practices used for misconduct and develop standard definitions and practices. I don't see an app for that. Sorry. And so develop standard definitions and practices as necessary for collection. So it's cross-referring back to the definitions that the task force comes up to. What it's saying in section 4 on page 8 is that those definitions shall be basically put into rules. Going forward. Section 5 is outcome analysis. So it says that on before January 15 of each year, from 2025 to 2030, the Secretary of Education shall submit a written report to you on suspensions and expulsions from each Vermont public school and approved independent school in the prior school year, including the data specified in, again, subdivision D6, so all that data. So you have a sense for outcome from what you've done. And the effective date is on passage, and then the title of the bill would change upon passage to an act relating to the creation of the task force on school discipline reform.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you very much. Any immediate questions or comments that anyone wants to make? Otherwise, what I thought we could do is give everyone, I put it on the calendar for Tuesday to, after everybody reviews it over the weekend, see if we have additional questions. I'm going to ask the Agency of Education to come in and weigh in on things. And I also want anybody over the weekend to think about any other witnesses they would like to hear from as we move forward. But this is, yes, Senator Lyons.
I might have missed it. Is there anything in here that asks the task force to look for model programs in other states?
No, there isn't.
No.
I wonder if that is
I like that.
appropriate.
Anybody disagree with that? Looking for model programs in other states? You disagree, Senator Chin?
No, I just want to say I'm a big fan of benchmarking. I do it a lot at UVM. It's always the first place to start. So great point, Senator Lyons.
Yeah, and it could be NCSL or somebody's got something. Yeah.
And this really is for new senators. If you haven't had an opportunity to reach out and look at the NCSL or CSG websites, they are great resources and great spots to completely nonpartisan, get involved as much as you can, go to their conferences, be a part of them, either related to education issues or anything that, you're passionate about. And if you ever need any help reaching out or please let us all know. So does everyone feel okay with spending some time over the weekend looking at this? I remember back to House Education when our first bills would sort of come through. I would just personally need some time to digest it, talk things through, take a look, see what, if any questions, any other witnesses that you want to hear from, and then we can kind of gather. Again, we'll make time on Tuesday. Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind scheduling the Agency of Education, Secretary French to come in and weigh in on this new draft, that would be helpful.
Would you like me to update this draft with the comments you've had so far?
That would be helpful, actually. And then if you wouldn't mind, I don't know what your schedule looks like, Jim, but if you would email us a new draft sometime over the weekend, that would give us.
Yeah, I'll do it today. So you
That
have
would be
it. Yeah.
perfect. That would be great. And Jeannie, are you okay getting the Agency of Education in on Tuesday to review this?
Yeah, can we talk after the?
Absolutely. I just wanted to make sure. Yep. Great. Great. Okay. Thank you all. We're getting there. All right. Speaking of the Agency of Education, if everyone's all right, we'll just keep going. So we get out earlier than later. I see we have Mr. Fisher with us. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Camp.
I believe this is your first time. I believe this is your first time in the committee this session. So glad to have you here. We are hoping that you, might give us some comments on some of your thoughts around what we were looking at yesterday, which was some draft language that we had received from Secretary French on the literacy bill. We had worked with Secretary French a little bit. He had basically, we posed the question, is there something around literacy that we could do this year to make advances? We got his thoughts. He sent us some language. We had that drafted up. We heard from a lot of witnesses yesterday. This is certainly a bill in progress. I think our witnesses were all pretty incredible, and I will be working with them and partnering with them. But there were some sort of just general outstanding questions around, why the evaluation that was put in there was put in there, and some other things. So I'm wondering if you would just comment broadly on some of those kinds of things. Does that give you enough?
Absolutely. Yeah. And good afternoon, Chair Campion and Vice Chair Hooker and members of the Senate Education Committee. Just for the record, my name is Ted Fisher, and I'm the Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs at the Vermont Agency of Education. And also, since the beginning of the pandemic, I wear an additional hat as the leader of the agency's COVID-19 response team. We're the team that's responsible, among other things, for working in the AOE's pandemic-related guidance, distribution of state resources to support school operations, and working in the emergency management framework as a partner in the State Emergency Operations Center. To your question, Chair, I have actually prepared some comments, and they are in writing as well. To both literacy and S16, we had an opportunity to take a look at draft 1.1. I know Secretary French would like to come in and check in with the committee again on probably on both these topics as you move through your deliberations. But Fridays are a challenging day for us on the pandemic response. So I'm here sort of in his stead to offer that. I would be happy to do whichever topic you'd like to consider first. Sure. And I do want to beg your indulgence to note one quick thing that is not on either of these topics as well, if that were okay.
Sure. What is that?
So that is it's related to some of the commentary I know that you heard from both Secretary French and Professor Teachout on dual enrollment. And I've just been asked to read a brief statement that sort of clarifies. We are a named litigant. So I'm limited in what we can say, but with your indulgence, I'd just like to read a very brief statement on that.
All right, why don't we start with S16 since it's fresh? We're
Absolutely
reviewing it, and you've seen the most recent draft, and you just heard the conversation. I think part of it, which will make some adjustments, and we'll also make sure that Jeannie emails you a copy of the new draft that Mr. Desmarais is working on today. But go ahead and weigh in on where you're at.
Yeah, absolutely. Just briefly before I start in reading my testimony, I'd like to just briefly contextualize my role as the leader of our small and mighty communications team of 2 at the agency and our legislative liaison. I'm by definition a generalist, so I'm certainly a student of education policy. There may be some questions that are beyond my expertise, and if that's the case, I'll do my best to be responsive today. But if there's something I can't answer, we can follow up in writing, or I'm sure Secretary French would love to come back in and speak to you about that. So,
thanks, I really appreciate
so
it.
on S16, I did provide written comments. I just want to say that we at the agency are very grateful for the committee's interest and work on this topic, and we really appreciate the proposed amendments that are reflected in draft 1.1, which you just heard from Council Demaray. And we are particularly appreciative of the provisions related to membership and the membership diversity, and a more active and immediate role in addressing the current disciplinary exclusion practices that we know are problematic and occur too often in Vermont schools. Working with Vermont school districts, we come across a lot of promising practice in Vermont schools, and these need to be highlighted and, as appropriate, made required of all districts in the state. We also come across problematic practice from time to time that, though not in violation of any current state law or regulation, demonstrates that we can and should do better by our students. And so we have a lot of work that we're proud of and could bring to your committee if you're interested. I've included a couple lists in my written testimony that I won't go over, but if you're interested, we'd be happy to provide some follow-up information on that. That's sort of the work that that's been ongoing in the agency that's related to this. But I would like to make a few brief comments about the data collection requirements in the bill. I know that the committee, listening to conversations earlier this week, had some questions about that. So we agree that reliable and easy to understand data are critical to holding the system accountable. And we're working very hard to improve AOE's data collection process, as well as with the field, to improve their ability to collect and report data in a timely manner, and as well as accurately. Some of this work includes building capacity at the agency and in individual school districts to collect, process, and report data in an accurate and timely manner. Some Vermont school districts still struggle with accurate reporting and on-time submission of required data collection, and we're well underway in a multi-year effort to provide additional support and technical capacity to assist school districts in this work. This does also include paying down technical debt in data systems, both in the agency at the state level and in individual school districts in the field. So we're committed to providing quality data to support policymakers, leaders, and educators, and we're confident and excited to work with stakeholders to provide good quality, useful data that's respectful of federal student privacy requirements. And we're looking forward to working with the task force to find solutions that provide data that are meaningful and valuable to this work. And we'd also be happy if the committee is interested to provide some specific feedback on the provisions of the bill related to data collection, in the interest of providing clarity and alignment to our ongoing data quality efforts, which is something that Secretary French, I know, previously mentioned to the committee. But I would just note, to reiterate what Secretary French has already said, at this point, we at AOE don't need to see any further data to be convinced that action is needed on the issue of suspension and expulsion. And we think that the bill, the draft reflected, or the current draft, excuse me, that you have in front of you is the next right step, and we're ready to work with the task force.
So you see no red flags. I mean, you're feeling good. You see things are in good shape from your end.
Yeah, I definitely think so. And we'll be looking forward to seeing additional drafts from the committee, and I'm sure Secretary French would like to speak to those as we move along, or as you move through your process. I would just note, because as I was joining the committee, I overheard some of the previous testimony from Mill Moore and the independent schools. We would absolutely welcome inclusion. I noticed that independent schools is actually already in subsection C of, I believe it's section 2. I apologize, Jim, if I messed that up. But we think that the perspective, particularly of therapeutic or special education focused schools, would be useful. So we'd be absolutely interested in seeing that.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Fisher about S16, his comments? Thank you. Okay. Literacy. I don't know if you were privy to yesterday's conversations, if you had an opportunity to review them, but it was a real robust dialogue. And if you want to weigh in a little bit, it would be much appreciated as we make our way through this next bill.
Absolutely. So I reached out originally when we were hearing the committee's review of the draft. This is draft request 210807. And then I did get a chance to overhear some of the testimony and the commentary from the stakeholders that we affectionately call the V's. So this is in part about that. I just thought it would make sense to speak about the sort of the context, the way we see legislative language in a broader, in this broader literacy effort. So that is to what my written comments are about this today. So we're very supportive of the language, and we're grateful for your consideration of it. And we understand, as I just mentioned, that you are in those conversations, and we welcome this robust and thoughtful conversation, because this is a really important issue. I just want to note that we'd be delighted to consider additional policy ideas in this area. So we're looking forward to seeing additional drafts. But we conceive of the proposal as it stands before you in the original draft as part of a larger conversation about the solutions to improve literacy outcomes for Vermont students, particularly in the early grades. We recognize and agree with the assertion of some of the other stakeholders, that you've heard from, that this is not a problem that can be solved by legislation alone. Improving literacy will require a focused, coordinated effort across multiple areas, including an assessment, improving practice, educator professional development, systems coherence, capacity, regulation, and law. And I mentioned systems coherence because AOE is increasingly focused on the importance of creating and sustaining coherent, strong school systems at the local level. And our Vermont framework of local control over the vast majority of education delivery, much is dependent on the success and capacity of our local school districts and supervisory unions. And ensuring that we have strong systems is critical to equitable and consistent outcomes statewide. And as you've heard, school districts face different conditions and challenges across the state, and their capacity to attend to critical issues like literacy varies as well. And we believe that the legislative proposal before you is a reasonable measure in the context of that broader effort to ensure that districts are rightly attentive to this important issue. So I just thought it'd be valuable, speaking with Secretary French and in responsive to the commentary you've heard, to just sort of give the conceptual framework in which we view the idea of having a school district policy and a new element of a superintendent evaluation. So this is the conceptual framework that we conceive of it. Which is that the Vermont Constitution holds the state responsible for educational outcomes, yet the state delegates significant responsibility to local school districts. Under statute, superintendents are CEOs of school districts or supervisory unions, and we assert that it is reasonable for a school board to examine as one element of a comprehensive superintendent evaluation whether the SU or member districts are making progress on the goals for student literacy outcomes. The agency is not advocating that superintendents should be evaluated, not evaluated on student outcomes alone, or that the state should dictate all facets of a supervisory union's evaluation of the superintendent. However, we do see value in adding accountability for progress and literacy outcomes to this important policy tool, which is the superintendent evaluation. And to the question, we did hear some committee members have questions about what the district's goals are and the implications for individual superintendent evaluations. And we suggest that it's up to the school board to decide what those goals are and their performance implications. With the responsibility for education split between the state and local jurisdictions as outlined above, this is the board's role, and the flexibility this provides will allow school districts to develop a literacy approach that is responsive to their local needs and conditions. And I should just note that this won't be happening in a vacuum. There's some legislative tools in the toolbox and levers to pull, but certainly we at AOE will continue to offer guidance and technical assistance, provide what we think the right thing is, and we understand that the dialogue between other stakeholders will as well. So I'm sure that will help with the goal setting. We're just looking to see a requirement in statute that would sort of make this a conversation front and center for every district. But as I referred to a moment ago, with the responsibility for education split between the local level and local flexibility, but the state ultimately responsible for education, we need to ensure that SUs are monitoring for student outcomes on a regular basis and not just waiting for state SBAC reports. In this context, a common data point that can be easily reported and comparable across systems is very useful. Current benchmark assessments, I heard them referenced yesterday, in use by the field, have the capacity to report results in Lexiles, which is one reason the agency recommends use of this metric, which is also widely used nationally. And I just want to say in closing that we agree with our other stakeholders and colleagues in the field that literacy is foundational to the educational expertise and is therefore worthy of special focus when evaluating organizational performance.
Mr. Fisher, you what you just read, you've submitted, so we have that.
Yes, absolutely.
Questions for Mr. Fisher? Senator Perslet, please.
Yeah, hi, Mr. Fisher and Ted. It's good to see you back in the committee.
See you.
My question is on the Lexile scores, and I don't know if you listened to the whole testimony on that, but I think the point that was to be made is not that there shouldn't be some way to measure these results, but that Lexile scores might not be the best measure. And so I'm assuming the agency would be at least open to considering other measurements if we can find them, that we can use either instead of Lexiles or in addition to Lexile scores. Is that accurate? I mean,
yeah, I think we'd certainly welcome that conversation. I am by no means an expert on Lexile. Secretary French is more knowledgeable, and there are some good reasons for why we've chosen them. But one reason is that they are integrated with some of the current benchmark tools that we're using, and they also do provide a common and comparable data set. I did hear the commentary yesterday, and we recognize that it's just one metric and it measures text complexity. That being said, there is a paucity of data particularly in the early grades. And so having something that can be reported out for that early and provide us another set of data earlier on is we believe it's important.
Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? Recognizing that what we have before us is going to be changed quite a bit, I think, based on the testimony we heard yesterday, and this is very, very helpful. Changed, added to, we're in the beginning of this process. Mr. Fisher, thank you. Would you like to, you said, read a statement regarding the issues that we're dealing with on separation of church and state?
Yes, and I very much appreciate the opportunity to do this. We just clarified we just wanted to clarify based on some of the comments in the conversation the other day. So I'll just read the following. As I said earlier, Secretary French is a named litigant. I'm a little bit limited in what I can say, but I'll just read the following. So when Secretary French offered comments regarding ongoing litigation involving AOE, the other day, one of his statements indicated that with regard to the dual enrollment program, AOE has not permitted students attending religiously affiliated independent schools to participate. This statement should not be interpreted to mean that AOE decides which students may access dual enrollment on a religious basis. As you know, the statute that establishes the dual enrollment benefit extends dual enrollment to students who are attending an independent school on a publicly funded basis. To that end, our analysis of district-reported financial data indicates that since 2001, at least 33 separate sending districts have elected in at least 80 separate instances to pay publicly funded tuition to their students to attend at least 24 different independent private high schools that have an apparent or declared religious affiliation. In at least one instance, a publicly funded district tuition payment was made to Rice Memorial High School on behalf of the student.
Okay.
And I appreciate the opportunity to read that.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, good to meet you for some of us. Good to have you back, as Senator Perslet mentioned. And looks like we'll be seeing you probably next week as we move forward.
Absolutely. It's lovely to meet many of you. I've really appreciated working with Senate Education in the past, and I'm looking forward to working with you in the future and hope to get to meet you in a non-virtual mode sometime very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Hooker, did you have a question? Oh, no. Okay. So committee, if you will, as Jim mentioned, he will send around a new draft of S16. Feel free to send along questions, or if you want to hear from additional witnesses, and we'll hear from the Agency of Education on Tuesday on that. I'm also going to ask Jim to put in writing, just again, he talked through, and Jim, you may have already done this, but you and I can talk more, but I would love to see in writing some of, our options as it relates to these church and state issues. I think it would just be helpful if you have the time. I would really appreciate it. Just, hey, hear the options. And it would also, I think, help us with our various caucuses going forward, Democrat, Republican, Progressive, just to say, hey, here are some of the things that we're considering, and this is what's on the table related to that. If you don't mind doing that next week.
No problem.
I will reach out, and I think Senator Perchlik, I'll copy you on this, but if anybody else is interested, I'm happy to copy them as well. The superintendent in Montpelier, as well as the representative of the Superintendents Association. I'm really excited and interested in jumping in more on literacy and presenting the committee with hopefully a revised and draft bill with some additional thoughts given everything I've heard and what we've heard from different people. And then by no means am I, just sort of bringing everything together and seeing and giving everybody an opportunity to respond to something different, kind of keeping in a little bit of what we've heard from the agency and adding some more to that. And I'll work on that this weekend and plan on bringing it to the committee. As everybody knows, or just a reminder, Tuesday we do have Jeff Fannin and others in to talk about what a plan might look like for those students who might be coming out of COVID and need some support this summer. I'm really excited to see what they put forward. Also excited to get a sense of whether or not where the agency is on this. And I know the administration is also really interested and concerned about those students in this kind of post-COVID environment. And of course, as we recognize and was mentioned yesterday, there'll be a mix out there. We know that some students, I'm even thinking of my own family with nieces and nephews, there were people that everything's okay with, and then there are some students that really will need some time and some work and some support, if you will. And we just want to make sure that's available for them. And I think this will overlap, and this is why, I think it's great Senator Lyons is here. I think this will overlap a lot with her committee, particularly as it relates to trauma and mental illness. So, okay, any other questions or comments? Really appreciate everything this week. Senator Perchlik, were you going for the mute button? Unmute?
Yeah, you're smart.
Well, it's just, I'm getting a mental sense of it. You and Senator Terenzini in particular, I can sense when it's, so.
You would have been a good Western gunslinger.
Yeah, Senator Terenzini. Yes, it's a little bit more obvious, but yeah.
I was just thinking, and maybe it's premature, that of also how much we enjoyed the conversation with the Harvard professor. I'm forgetting her name, but if we saw that as part of this literacy bill, checking in back with her at all. I mean, that was kind of the reading wars, so to speak, but and maybe we can do that sort of offline, but just something I thought I'd mention.
Yeah, no, I'm sure she'd be happy to come back. I believe she was, just to make sure, she was at NYU, unless you're thinking of Mira Levinson, who came in from Harvard on civic education. NYU.
Oh, yeah, that's right. I'm getting the civic.
Okay, yeah.
Right,
So yeah, I think Professor Newman would be happy to come back in and weigh in. And of course, you may have people in your constituency and others that you want to have weigh in at any time.
Yeah.
Please let me know. Okay, it's Friday afternoon. I think it's been a busy week for everybody. I'm sure your other committees have been as well. Jim, thank you for everything you're doing for all of us, as usual.
Welcome. You're welcome. Yep.
And Jeannie, thanks a million. And unless there are other comments or questions, we'll adjourn for the weekend, and I'll look forward to seeing everybody Tuesday.
Have a good weekend.
Thanks, you too. Thanks very much.
Bye-bye.